Okay, so when I say the name Leonardo da Vinci, what pops into your head? Mona Lisa, right? The Last Supper? Of course. They're absolute icons. But here's the thing, that's just scratching the surface. To really get what made him a genius, we've got to go deeper. We need to look behind the paintings, into this incredible, constantly working mind that was driving everything.
So check this out. On one side, you have this stunningly beautiful painting, the Virgin of the Rocks. And on the other, you've got the guts of another masterpiece, the raw mathematical blueprint, the geometry. And this is the whole secret to Leonardo's genius. For him, the beautiful art and the hardcore science, they weren't two different things. They were the exact same thing. So yeah, we know the artist. But do we really know the mind behind the art? That's the big question we're diving into here. We're gonna peel back the layers, look past the famous paintings, and really meet the guy who was, let's be honest, probably one of the most wildly talented people who ever lived. The inventor, the scientist, the engineer, all rolled into one.
All right, section 1, beyond the masterpieces. And to kick things off, we've got to do something a little weird. We need to look at the paintings he never even finished. Because honestly, the story of what he didn't do is almost more revealing than the story of what he did. Think about this number for a second. 15. That's it. For arguably the most famous painter of all time, we can only for sure say that about 15 of his paintings exist today. I mean, his career lasted for decades. That number is shockingly small. So what gives? What was going on?
Well, the answer tells you a ton about who he was. For one, he was a massive procrastinator. But even more than that, he was obsessed with experimenting. Take The Last Supper, for example. He didn't use the tried and true fresco method. No, he tried this crazy new technique on a drywall, and it was a total disaster. The painting literally started falling apart almost as soon as he finished it. See, for Leonardo, it was never just about finishing a pretty picture. It was about pushing the limits and trying something new. So, where did this obsession with mixing art and science come from? To figure that out, we've got to rewind a bit. Let's go back to when he was just a kid, an apprentice starting out in Florence.
Okay, there's this fantastic story about him. Now, it's probably been exaggerated over the years, but it totally captures his insane early talent. So picture this, he's just a teenager in his master's studio, and he gets the job of painting one single angel in a big painting. Well, the legend goes that Leonardo's angel was so stunning, so much more real than anything his master could do, that his master, a guy named Verrocchio, just threw down his brushes and supposedly never painted again. Talk about making an impression.
And you gotta understand, the place where he learned his craft wasn't your typical art school. A Renaissance bodega, as they were called, was so much more. It was like a workshop and a science lab all in one. In his master's studio, Leonardo wasn't just learning to paint. He was studying anatomy, mechanics, math, even music and philosophy. For them, there was no line in the sand between being an artist and being an engineer. It was all connected.
And all that scientific training? It's exactly what let him completely change the game of painting. He basically invented what you could call a science of seeing. He used everything he learned to create a kind of realism and depth in his art that nobody had ever seen before.
Let's go back to The Last Supper. This painting is the perfect example of his science of seeing. Just look. See how every single line in the room, the ceiling, the walls, they all point to one single spot, right behind Christ's head? That's not an accident. He's literally using geometry to force your eyes to the most important part of the story. It's storytelling with math. How cool is that? And he was a master of two major types of perspective. First, there's linear perspective. That's the mathy one, with all the lines pointing to one spot. But then there's atmospheric perspective, which is just brilliant. It came from him just looking at the world. He noticed that the farther away something is, the more hazy and bluish it looks. Why? Because you're looking at it through more air. He put that right into his paintings.
But his toolbox was just overflowing with these science-based tricks. You've heard of sfumato, right? That super soft, smoky look on the Mona Lisa? That came from studying how light actually works. Then there's chiaroscuro, the dramatic contrast between light and dark that makes things look so 3D. And of course, the golden ratio. He used this divine proportion, this mathematical rule, to make sure his paintings felt perfectly balanced and just right.
And you can see it right here in his painting of St. John the Baptist. The whole composition, the way the figure is posed, it follows the curve of the golden spiral perfectly. This isn't just him guessing what looks good. This is him using math on purpose to create something that feels naturally beautiful and harmonious. It's genius.
Okay, so the paintings are mind-blowing, obviously. But believe it or not, they're only half the story. if you really want to get to know Leonardo, you have to look inside his private notebooks.
And this little story tells you everything you need to know about how he saw himself. When he was basically writing a cover letter to the Duke of Milan, he went on and on for 10 paragraphs about all his skills as a military engineer, how he could design bridges, cannons, you name it. And then only at the very end, almost like an afterthought, he's like, oh yeah, and I can paint a little bit too. Can you believe that? In his own head, he was an engineer who just happened to be good at art.
His notebooks were his secret lab. Think of them like the first ever search engine, but on paper. I mean, the stuff in there is just staggering. You've got sketches for flying machines, plans for hydraulic systems, incredibly detailed drawings from when he was dissecting human bodies, even designs for giant crossbows and stage costumes. This was a mind that was curious about literally everything.
Oh, and here's the crazy part. He wrote almost all of it backwards, in mirror writing. To this day, people argue about why he did it. Was he trained to keep his ideas secret from prying eyes? Or was it just easier for him? You know, since he was left-handed, writing right to left meant he wouldn't smudge the ink. Who knows? But either way, it definitely adds to the mystery, right?
So when you have this unique mashup of talents, you're a world-class artist, a brilliant scientist, and a cutting-edge engineer, people are going to notice, and they did. Leonardo became one of the first real international celebrities, with all the most powerful rulers in Europe desperate to hire him.
I mean, just look at his resume. He moves from Florence to Milan to be the Duke's main guy. Then he ends up working as a military engineer for the notorious Cesare Borgia. After that, he's in Rome working for the Pope, and to top it all off, the King of France invites him over and gives him what might be the coolest job title ever. First painter, architect, and mechanic to the king. That title says it all, doesn't it?
Okay, so let's pull all this together. When you look at the whole picture, the art, the science, the inventions, what's his real legacy? What was the one big thing he was trying to do?
At the end of the day, Leonardo's ultimate goal wasn't just to paint a pretty picture. It was way bigger than that. He wanted to understand how everything works. In his mind, how could you possibly paint a mountain if you didn't understand geology? How could you draw an arm if you didn't understand how the muscles worked? For him, art, science, engineering, they weren't different subjects. They were all just different tools in the same toolbox, all for figuring out the secrets of nature.
So it really boils down to three things that made him who he was. First, this deep, relentless curiosity. He just had to know how things worked. Second, the absolute conviction that art and science are the same thing, just different ways of looking at the truth. And third, this amazing ability to see patterns everywhere, to see how the veins on a leaf look just like the branches of a river, which look just like the blood vessels in your own body. He saw connections that nobody else did.
And that brings us to one last big question for today. We live in a world that's all about hyper-specialization, right? You're told to pick your one thing, get really good at it, and stay in your lane. So what can a guy like Leonardo, the ultimate polymath, the man whose genius came from coloring outside of every single line, teach us today?